everyone, welcome to the Hitchhiker's Way podcast. Today we have Yana Welinder. She co-founded Kraftful. She sold a copilot product to 45,000 plus product teams, including huge companies like Google, PwC, and Netflix. It's actually super nice to have you here, Yana. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me. Really, really excited to chat.
Yeah. So I just want to start out with kind of like the fundamental beginning of your story. So that's your childhood, right? Can you like give a background to yourself, like how you were brought up and how did that actually kind of affect your work ethic?
Yeah, so I grew up in Sweden and I actually wasn't born in Sweden. I came to Sweden at a very young age. My parents immigrated to Sweden from USSR, and so I grew up, first generation immigrant, and had to go through some challenging things like living in an asylum camp, like not knowing what's going to happen and things like that. But then also just had to figure out how to like fit into a society as a kid, right? Without really understanding the norms, without having parents who could kind of guide me through the norms of that country, right? Because it was all super new to them and they were trying to figure it out. So I think like a lot of my like growing up was about figuring out human psychology and how to fit into a system, because Sweden is a very specific society. Like it's all like everyone's kind of the same, and you have to be the same, and you cannot stick out in any sense. There's a lot of very nuanced things about Sweden that are sort of like there's a lot of things that people know about Sweden. There's a lot of things that are less known, which kind of has to do with what it means to be a immigrant in Sweden, which is actually a very different thing than like just growing up in Sweden. And so I think like just figuring that out, I think that really helped me just be able to empathize with people in lots of different contexts. It then helped me be able to build, I think, better products as a result of that, because I'm always kind of not just thinking about, okay, I'm building this thing. I'm always thinking about how is it going to be perceived by this person who may not be like me, usually isn't, right? And what's going on in their mind as they're looking at it, and they're trying to make it work. And then also just like this concept of being an outsider and trying to figure out the system. I think that that's all about kind of entrepreneurship, right? Like you
Yeah.
are doing things for the first time and you're trying to figure out like a gazillion different systems for the very first time, and be successful in that context. So I think just like my childhood really prepared me for all of those challenges really well, even though at the time it was incredibly hard.
So, just trying to fit in really created this empathizing character in you, and that actually helped you in building products. That's like super, it's like interesting actually.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's interesting because actually, like as an entrepreneur and a product builder, you don't want to fit in, and so then I later had to like unlearn a lot of that, right? I had to unlearn the motivation to want to fit in, and I think I'm still unlearning the motivation to want to fit in, while having developed a lot of skills trying to fit in, right? So I think that that's sort of like the interesting dichotomy. It was helpful but unhelpful in other ways.
So, you grew up in Sweden and you went to college. What happened after college? How did you get into tech and being a product leader in companies like Carbon? And how did it
Yeah.
go?
Yeah, so I went to college in London, and before doing that, I spent a gap year in Dublin, just working. So I'm kind of after high school, I bought a one-way ticket to Dublin, and I've never been there. And then I had a little bit of money to pay for like the one-way ticket and like a few nights of hostel, and then had to like find a job basically. And so I did that. That was sort of like my first foray out of Sweden, and then did get a job, and it was sort of like a really fun experience living there. And then ultimately I ended up going to college in London and moved to the US for grad school after college. I studied law, and so I worked as a lawyer for a couple of years. And then I kind of always had this feeling that law wasn't quite right for me. There was just something very off about practicing law. Like it was interesting, it was intellectually stimulating, but it didn't really feel like I kept searching for the right thing. So I went back to school. I got a a third law degree actually, a academic law degree, and so then I became a law professor. And I was a law professor in tech, so I focused on tech law. And there, I think I kind of, a lot of my research then focused on how do you replace legal policies with user experience, which ultimately, I sort of at some point realized that's product. That is really product. I'm thinking about how to like do product at a bigger regulatory level, but actually I should be out there building product. And so I ended up going back to industry. I applied some of my research at the Wikimedia Foundation on Wikipedia, and there ended up doing kind of first legal work, but ultimately doing more product work. And after that, really transitioned into product and felt like, okay, I figured it out. It was actually all wrong. I was on the wrong path, and now I'm sort of like feel like I'm doing the work I was intended to do. That I feel is satisfactory isn't just because it's intellectually stimulating, but it feels fulfilling in a different way.
So after that, you went to Carbon, and then you worked at Triple T, and then slowly you knew how the product managers worked for a while. And did you like wanted to build Kraftful before itself, or was it like an idea which came after working at all of these different companies and you were just searching for something?
Yeah, Kraftful definitely came. The idea for Kraftful definitely came after being product manager at different places. But meanwhile, I started a lot of different companies that I just did not take to that same level for various reasons. And so, because one example, I started a women's health company in like 2017 or something like that. I think I applied to YC with that. I ended up not getting in that time, and but I had like a few thousand users, but I was sort of doing that company on the side. And I had a few companies like that where I sort of like started doing the company, but I didn't feel like there was enough validation there to fully pursue it. With Kraftful, I started from a problem and ended up getting into YC before I had a chance to build a solution. And so that was sort of like, I think, broke my pattern of building companies but not really going all in, because YC was sort of like, you got to quit your job and and start the company if you want to be in YC, and so I did. But I think
So
like
you got
it's
into
very
YC
possible.
with just. I'm so sorry for interrupting. So you got into YC with an idea, but you didn't actually build Kraftful.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
right. Yeah, so it was completely idea stage, which nowadays is fairly common again. And used to be common back in the day, but around the time when we did it was not very common. And so I think we were like the youngest company in the batch, and was a very strange experience actually, because like some of the other companies had been like around for like 3 years or more, and so they were like in some scaling stage where they were just like changing how they were scaling. And it's like just starting out and just figuring out how to build a product from scratch, like really from scratch, was a very different experience. Now I think it's different because like so many companies are in that same boat.
So did you try validating the idea before like talking to the YC people? Like, how did you come across the right idea by talking to customers?
Yeah, so Kraftful's pivoted a lot during the past, almost I think coming up on 6 years now. And so the original idea that I pitched to YC back in the day was very, very different from what Kraftful is today. And so that idea I did validate by talking to customers in my capacity at IFT, because we were also selling to product managers, and specifically selling to like a subset of product managers which were in connected hardware. And so I had lots and lots of conversations with a very particular type of persona of like a VP of products or a CPO at particular types of companies. And they all had questions for me because I was sort of like head of product at a purely software company. And all those questions were sort of like revealing this problem to me that I kept hearing over and over again from different angles. And that could be like from like car manufacturers, or like smart light company, or a smart lock company, or like connected fitness, right? But they all had similar types of problems that I kept hearing over and over again. And so I had an opportunity to kind of learn about that problem without trying to pitch them a solution, and really just deeply understand the problem. And then I felt like there is a solution there, and we ended up iterating on exactly what that solution was. But that was sort of what I got to present to YC, was like, hey, I've had a ton of these conversations. I didn't really even mean to talk to customers when I had that. I mean, I meant to talk to customers, but for a very different reason. But I kept hearing about this one problem that like it wasn't at all related to what IFT was doing, and so it didn't at all make sense for me to do it there. But I do think this is a problem, and I want to solve it.
So you told you went through a lot of pivots, right? So why do you think this stage you are right now, which is worked, and what did Kraftful get right this time?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I think that we actually had a few of our pivots previously also were working, and unfortunately didn't work as a result of kind of more macroeconomic issues. And so it's been an interesting piece, like searching for product market fit, when sometimes we found product market fit previously, but then the market changed. so suddenly we didn't have fit again. But this time I do think that the market was changing, and it changed for the better. And so that's kind of the difference that happened here, was that there was product market fit, and in fact we're solving a problem that I had this problem as a product manager, and I know like every product manager I know has this problem. And then suddenly the technology changed to be able to fix that problem, and I came up with sort of like a good way to actually be able to do that. But then kind of we pivoted to this in the fall of 2022, right before ChatGPT was launched. And so then we like started building it, like our MVP for this, and launched it right like in the beginning of 2023, and could really ride that AI wave. And so I think for once, the difference was that yes, market was changing, but it was changing in the same direction as we were moving, and not in the opposite direction, which is sort of like incredible to experience. to finally be able
Totally
to like ride a wave instead of just like paddling up in the wrong direction,
It's the right time. So you knew that the market was changing in your heart, and you were trying to build the product, and you were trying to ride the wave with the product, right? So if there's a new market change which is happening like 4 or let's say 8 months from now, what are the key indications will you look at?
Yeah.
What?
So it's kind of, I can go back to kind of what happened then, what made me think that it would happen, and then we can kind of think from there, like how would that apply to the future. In that instance, I built the first prototype of what Kraftful is today in early 2020. I was fortunate to have like early alpha access to the GPT API, and so like just by tinkering with it, that was the very first thing I applied it to. Was like, okay, well, user feedback, what if you could summarize that, right? Like it was a text generation, so everyone were like writing novels with it and doing that kind of things. And I was like, no, I'm this like PM who's had to like read lots and lots of app reviews with a glass of wine on Friday nights. That's what I'm going to apply it to, right? So that was sort of like I got to try it out very early. It wasn't great back then at that use case, because I think it really just got better at summarization later on. And so I say this as I sort of got to follow the path of how the technology was evolving, right? I kept applying it to this problem. We ultimately ended up launching a feature that was what Kraftful ultimately became in 2021. And then we pivoted to it in late 2022. But the point is that I sort of got to see how the technology was evolving, and how it had gone from being not applicable to this problem, not in a compelling way, to being somewhat working, to suddenly being so much better. And that like quick trajectory was telling me that it's going to be perfect. Like very soon it's going to be perfect, and it's going to solve this problem. I need to jump on it and do it now. and I have to do it in a way where where I will be able to catch the wave. Like I think, one option could have been for me, like in 2022, late 2022, is to go and stealth and build for a year or two, right? But then I knew that this is escalating. I'm gonna miss the wave. We need to like launch with a really scrappy MVP that was built in like 3 months. Otherwise, it's gonna be too late, right? So I think like that's sort of like the pieces, I guess. If you have the opportunity to follow a technology and you can see it evolving, and if you can see that, okay, it's starting to work, I think now we're starting to see that maybe with some of these like agent technology and agent model, right? That's taking off. That's probably like in 8 months, that's the thing you should have been writing. That, and I guess full disclosure, we're doing that too, right? Like we're doing a lot of what Kraftful is essentially an agent that goes out and does things for you and collects feedback and all that stuff, right? So it is that, right? It's watching what's happening and how the technology is evolving and trying to figure out when is this kind of inflection point happening.
So, and you actually mentioned about getting into YC with an idea, right? So, why do you think YC took a bit on you?
I do think that there's something like around me being very problem oriented, right? Like I'm not sort of looking at technology and then thinking about like where can I apply this. I'm very much just like going around my day and then like facing problems and being like someone needs to solve these problems, right? And I think like every startup idea that I've worked on has always been that. And I've sometimes found myself actually in jobs as a product manager where I was like given a technology and like told to go work on that. And I was like, no, let's not do that. Let's figure out what is there a problem? Like, can we start with the problem? And so I think that's very like compatible with the YC mindset, is that you should be thinking about the user's problem and build something people want, right? Like you shouldn't be building something because you like building. You should be wanting to help people and do something better for them. And that was right. Like I did have a specific problem. I had a sense that problem can be solved. And I think that was sort of like compelling to like how YC was thinking about things. And that's been consistent with then how I ended up building Kraftful, right? Because I haven't been tied to a specific solution, which has made it easy for me to pivot into kind of more and more right direction until ultimately getting to where Kraftful is today.
So, during your time at YC, was there any kind of startup or a founder that you really admired in terms of the intensity and the obsession they had?
Yeah. I mean, I think that just like there were a bunch of startups in our batch that it was sort of like interesting. We had, we had the big, like all of YC, right, which was like something like 200 companies in our batch. And then that was divided into subgroups, and those groups would be sort of your small batch that you would meet with on a weekly basis and talk about your startups. And we interestingly got in the same group as both the Mixpanel founder and the Docker founder, who were both building their second company. And so you have these like mega stars, right? And then you'd also have folks who had just dropped out of college, who were building their companies. And I think like these like college dropouts, these really young kids, were incredible just to watch them like try everything. And they like some of them would just like continuously pivot during YC. And I think like just not like they would jump on areas that most people would just feel incredibly daunted by. If you've been in the industry and been working, and you'd know like, oh no, this thing like, oh, this has a bunch of like medical like regulatory issues, and you just will have to like work with that forever. And they would just be like, oh, here's the problem, let's try to go solve it, right? And not knowing that. But I think that just like that sheer like willpower would get to something that ultimately worked. And so there were a lot of, I guess there's a lot of founders that I found incredibly impressive during that time. And it was just such incredible concentration of really impressive folks in one building.
Amazing. So let's talk about Kraftful now. And so you're building your first product, which gets a lot of customers. And during the early iteration of speaking to these kind of customers, how did you get your like first 30 or 40 customers, for your first set of customers? Did you like find
Yeah.
an insight that worked again and again?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, for the first few customers, they all came via Twitter, actually. And I think what I realized was that, and they wouldn't necessarily come because I marketed Kraftful. It was more kind of random than that. The time we realized this was happening was I tweeted about non-alcoholic beer, and that tweet kind of took off. It wasn't viral or anything, it just like was interesting to like a larger group of people, and so folks were interacting with that, and like that day and the next day we saw that like people were interacting with that tweet, going probably to check out my profile. We're like, oh, okay, she's the founder of Kraftful. And they would go and read about Kraftful on our website, and the positioning was resonated with them, so they signed up. And I think the thing I've learned from that experience is that the important things are to have really clear positioning that will resonate with people, and then have a way to like get their attention, get the right people to pay attention. And it doesn't have to be with anything that's related to product management, right? In our case, it's just that it was something like, I think, there's a lot of folks in tech who are interested in non-alcoholic beer. So that was sort of like interesting to them. You can attract people's attention with whatever happens to be interesting to the subgroup you're trying to engage. And then if you have good positioning to show them, that will interest them. And then we kind of scaled that. I kind of had to think through what are the sort of things that product managers would want to read about or engage with. And so I had a lot of like different types of tweets and posts that we experimented with, and ultimately kind of some of them were incredibly successful in driving signups, and some less so. And we still experiment there, which is sort of, I think that's kind of how you want to do it.
So all of these posts which worked, can you like drive an insight from behind? Like what was the root thing that caused all of these posts to work?
Yeah, I think it is a combination of things that are interesting to, ideally, though that non-alcoholic beer post doesn't fall in that category, but ideally something that compels people to engage with it. And so for a while I was doing a lot of these like product manager questions, and then people would come and like provide their perspective on that. That was really helpful. And then something that people learn from, the non-alcoholic beer post does fall into that category. So you like folks learned about a lot of like non-alcoholic beers that they didn't previously know about, and they were interested in it, so they like it was helpful. I did that with like those product management questions, when I asked them, and I essentially collected lots and lots of feedback, and then I would take those threads and I would run them through Kraftful and summarize them, and give like then post a list of things that were like what did people say about this topic, right? So that was then helpful, because then people engaged with that too, because that was then kind of provided knowledge, and then they also knew, okay, the next question she will ask will probably make it into that list, so I want to engage with that because it's going to be helpful in lots of different ways. So I think like a lot of things around just like helpfulness and engagement, I would say, are probably the two kind of underlying themes.
Amazing. So you created content which so you started talking to your customers, like product management teams, and you started curating insights which was like curious to other people to know. And then from there you got some engagement, and they looked at your profile and they went into Craftful and it was useful for them, and that's how it all happened.
Yeah,
Amazing.
absolutely. I mean, and we've had like 100% organic growth until now. We've just recently started experimenting with ads, which I think is sort of like, you do want to wait with that. You absolutely don't want to start with paid, which is, I'm seeing a lot of folks in the industry do that, but I don't think that's a good idea, because then you will never really know what resonates with people.
Awesome. So did you charge your customers from the beginning? Like, how did your pricing strategies evolve from the beginning to the day right now?
Yeah, we did. So we launched with like Stripe integrated from day one, because we did want to make sure that like whatever we had, people wanted to pay money for. Um, I'd say that that was the right call. We then did a bunch of mistakes that I would have done differently if I would have done it again. I think we launched and we had a bunch of people sign up. We had a bunch of people pay, and then we started optimizing to getting more people to pay. But the problem was that we had launched with like a very scrappy MVP that wasn't a complete solution yet. And so I think that it was just the wrong focus to then focus on optimizing pricing and upgrades and revenue before optimizing completely building out the product. It actually took me quite a long time to realize that that was the problem, because we kept iterating on pricing. We kept getting a lot of feedback on pricing, which then was like, okay, well, we have to continue iterating on it, right? Because you're sort of like, as you're getting feedback from people, you feel like, okay, this is interesting to them. People want to pay and they want to figure out how they pay us the right amount and things like that. But ultimately, the product wasn't fully built. So we spent a ton of energy on that, when really we should just have been completely at that point just be thinking about how do we make the product better. So, I think we got some things right, but definitely would do it differently next time.
Did you have like a framework that you use to uh, price right now? Like the last iteration?
Yeah, so the last iteration, we're now basically charging on a per word basis. And the reason we're doing that is that it's a very helpful framework for being able to tell you how much value you're deriving as a product manager, right? If like there's an average person can read a certain number of words per minute, right? So if we can just tell you, we save you X number of hours, are you prepared to pay this amount for not spending these hours reading your user feedback, right? It's a very kind of clear way of being able to tell, okay, this is worth it or this is not worth it, right? So that's kind of what we ultimately arrived at after lots and lots of experimentation and different models. But that seems to be working really well.
Very nice. So when you were starting Kraftful, why did you choose to go into solo founding the company? Why not a co-founder?
So I didn't actually choose to be a solo founder. I did originally have a co-founder in Kraftful. I had a co-founder for the first like year or so, and like we're really great friends, and we still are really great friends. We worked together at IFT. So I was head of product. He was our principal engineer, and we applied to IC together. And at some point, he decided that he doesn't want to be a founder, and that was actually a very like shocking experience for me at the time. But I later, as I figured things out and pivoted the company about 100 times after that, and now I've been a solo founder for a very long time. I do think that for most part, I sort of feel like being a solo founder is great. I love it. I can move, for most part I can move faster that way. But you have your like 10% where you're sort of like, why do I think I can do this without a co-founder? This is crazy. This is so hard. But yes, it wasn't a conscious choice. But in hindsight, I do think I do enjoy it for most part.
So the part of your of your co-founder, how big was the team?
It wasn't big at all. It was just we had hired our first employee.
So you were with your first employee and yourself, and how did that feel like? Like, how did you
Yeah,
get through
so my
that
co-founder
mental
didn't actually
sanity?
leave right away. Sorry. When he told me that he didn't want to be a founder, we had just hired our first employee. He then stayed with the company and helped me hire some more folks before leaving. So just to clarify, but yeah, so we hired two more people, and then he actually left. But yeah, how it felt was very, yeah, I had this feeling like, I don't know, this is like, you're have the sense of you're going through something that's really hard, and there is just like this one person who's there doing it with you, and suddenly suddenly you're not, and you're now it all falls on you. And so like there are definitely moments where I felt like, you know, I like the buck stops with me, and there's like no other, like there's no other way, right? Like if you know, if I get burnt out, there's no one else who can like encourage the team. If like, you know, if something happens, it's all on me, right? But I think that so that still is overwhelming at times. But on the other hand, it is incredibly refreshing in just how fast you can move as a solo founder, right? Because speed is the most important thing when you're a startup. And I think that, and I know this from just like all my friends who have co-founders and just having had a co-founder, is that you end up debating a lot of things fairly extensively when you have when you're a team of co-founders. And when you're a founder, you can really just be action oriented and decide that, okay, here's all the data I have in front of me. We're doing this. And then you're just doing it, right? And then you're trying it. And if it didn't work, you're like, okay, here's the new set of data I have in front of me. We're doing this. And then you can kind of move forward and iterate much faster. And of course, you need to get the team on board with that and get excited. But I found that, you know, so far, I guess I haven't made decisions that have felt wrong to them. So we do end up debating things sometimes with the team, but I don't think you do it quite as much as you do when you have two co-founders or three co-founders or four co-founders, because I think co-founders want to make decisions, right? Like, so you kind of, everyone wants to be the decision maker. Whereas if you're the solo founder, you are the decision maker, you are the default decision maker. And yes, the team will want to like provide input, but ultimately the founder is the decision maker. And so there's a very different kind of dynamic in a team with a solo founder.
I think this is a great point. Nobody talks about how fast the company moves when there's a solo founder. Like, that should be more put out.
Yeah, I mean, you move slower in other ways, right? Because there's like certain things that you can't do because a founder is going to be always thinking like 3 steps ahead. And like employees tend, like, that's just, it's not their job, right? Like, it's not like, as a founder, you're like, this is my baby. I need to think about how this baby is going to be when it grows up. I need to like get it into the best school, you know, like all these kind of things. That's like, you only get that as a founder. You're like, you're constantly spinning about how do I get this as good as possible. And if you have multiple co-founders, then more people are doing that spinning all the time. So that's helpful for moving it forward. But you also just like have this like indecisiveness that you don't have when one person is spinning and then you move, right?
Yeah. So did Kraftful race around after YC? Like, did it get some after YC? Did you kind of go around and race around?
Yeah. So I raised a pre-seed during or like after demo day, and then a seed, and we actually raised another seed more recently after this pivot of Kraftful in 2023. So
this is after your co-founder left.
Yes, yeah.
So how did you handle this kind of fundraising process? Since fundraising is kind of like a number game, and you need to speak to a lot of investors, but also at the same time you need to take care of the product by side, right? So how did you kind of manage your time as a solo founder and also fundraising at the same time?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it is probably kind of the most I would say the hardest thing to do as a solo founder. And in fact, I think in my last round, I ended up deciding to raise a different round as a result of that, because I felt like I didn't have time to step away from the product for as long as I needed to. And so I was like, this, you know, how can I do the fastest round possible? And so I did a round in like a couple of weeks or a few weeks, and optimized everything for just being really fast. And some investors are sort of like, oh, we need to have like a longer process. I'm like, well, great, but I don't have time for that right now. I'm not like, I need to be with the product. I need to be with the customers. I am the founder. I have a lot of hats to wear, and I can't just be fundraising. And so that influenced the kind of round I could raise as a result, for sure. It's probably one of those like 10% moments where I'm like, why am I trying to do this alone? It's not going to work. It does work, but it's just different.
How did you, is there an interesting story on how you got your first seed check? after YC?
I don't even remember which one exactly was my first GSC check, to be honest.
No, after YC you
It was
told
it
you were
was at
racing
demo day,
around,
and
right?
so there was a lot, like around demo day. So I was just having tons and tons of conversations around that time, and the way demo day works, or like the dynamics of demo day, it was, I think we closed the first few, got the first few checks prior to demo day, but generally just that forcing mechanism of demo day is incredibly impactful, and you're having a gazillion conversations that mostly all came inbound, and then you kind of have to figure out how do I get more outbound. But for the first few investors you're talking to, they're coming inbound, and so I think the first few checks were all coming in roughly around the same time, and it was all lots of intense conversations, pitching investors, and then closing, because you really want to have a few around that time. It's sort of like YC has evolved a lot over the years. Around that time, it was sort of like we were told not to fundraise prior to demo day, and then like a week or so before demo day, we're sort of like, you can go and fundraise now if you want to, just a little bit. And but then you realize that actually, if you have raised a little bit, like some amount prior to demo day, the demo day fundraise is going to be much easier. So suddenly you have this time crunch to try to raise as much as you possibly can without and you only have like very little time, right? So it's sort of like a really interesting kind of game. And I think lately YC companies have started raising earlier in anticipation of demo day. Sometimes rounds are even closed by demo day, so it's sort of like slightly different. But back then it was sort of like we were highly encouraged not to do it until demo day. And then I think in our case, because we were so early, it really also didn't make sense, because we were just building, right? Like we were just getting our early traction. So we didn't want to start early.
So I want to talk a little bit about product building, and I just want to bring up a quote from Henry Ford. He asked, it's about him asking his customers uh, what kind of solution they want to get to a point faster, and they would have told faster horse, because they don't know, they know the outcome of the solution, but they don't know the solution, right? They don't know that a car should be existing to take them from A to B in a faster rate. So it's the work of the founder to figure out 3 or 4 steps ahead from the customers to actually visualize a solution. But there's also a fine line between visualizing a solution for a market which is too early, right? You might lose customers too. How do you kind of identify that while
Yeah,
building products?
I think it's a great question. It's a particularly great question today, because like everything's moving so rapidly, right? And how like everyone's work is being redefined with AI, and everything's sort of changing. And I think a lot about sort of, what is product building going to look like in 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, and then what does it look like today, and then how do we best solve for today, given where it's going in 5 years or 10 years, right? So I think it's all about kind of building towards that future. If you have a vision for what is that future going to be like, building with that vision in mind. But you can't build that solution, because it's not going to work at all to what people are doing today. So you kind of have to build a solution for the need people have today. But I do think that the one interesting thing is, if you're constantly thinking about the future and where it's going, at least we've been trying to avoid building the solution for some problems that are in the process of going away right now. And I think that there's a lot of, like, for example, there's a lot of research problems in product that have been a thing in the past, where you sort of like you do a lot of different types of research, but really there's only some of that research that is the thing that is really helpful to product teams to actually like help them figure out what to build. And And some of that has been really hard. Some of like that kind of insights have been hard to get at because like the technology hasn't existed previously. And so now what we're doing is we're leveraging the technology to be able to answer those product questions without necessarily like rebuilding mechanisms to be able to do all of the different types of research that folks have done in the past, because they're not really necessary anymore, but people are still asking for them. So it's been kind of a challenge for us to be able to tell when people are asking for these kind of solutions, we don't need to rebuild them with new type of technology because they're going away. We really need to focus on these set of problems, solve for that, and then also know that very soon product development is going to look very different. And so how, like, what's the arc from what we're building to what we ultimately are going to build, and make sure we're sort of anticipating that in our product. So that's kind of how we're solving for that.
Awesome. So, like moments ago, you were mentioning about Kraftful testing AI agents. Like this, I think there was this article from Lenny that really scared all the product managers. I think it was about the AI replacing product managers. What do you think about that, and how do you think AI agents are going to play a role here in the future?
Yeah. So I don't think that, I don't necessarily think about it from the perspective of product managers per se, because I think that product managers fall into the category of product builders, that are, like product managers, like engineers, designers. And I do think that product builders aren't going to go away. Whether they will be replaced or not is a very different question, but product builders will not go away, right? And the way to square that is that, yes, AI is going to become better and better at building products. It will become better at listening to users. It will become better at designing products. It will become better at building products. It will become better at shipping products, at marketing products, you name it. But the human desire to build things for other humans will also be there. And I think that there's going to be, those two things will live side by side. In similar ways to, like, I think a good analogy today is like art and photography, right? Like this concept of people previously were just like doing photorealistic paintings, and then suddenly photography came around, and it became much better at photorealism. So that didn't make sense. I mean, some people still do photorealism, but like that's not, that's not the predominant art forms today. But a bunch of other art forms developed, and art is still a big area, of course, right? And photography is too. And so I think that like AI developed products will be a thing, and human developed products will be a thing. And then in that human developed product world, product managers as a category of product builders will still have a place. They'll be doing very different things. Of course, like everything, like human generated products will still be AI enabled in a lot of ways. But there will be this like sense of, as humans, we're driven to create something for other humans, and therefore we will create that like market opportunity, even if there will be like kind of non-artisanal products that are like fully end-to-end AI generated.
So AI cannot find this motive for building to other humans properly. I mean, for now, if AGI exists tomorrow, we won't know what's going to happen, right? These technology is increasing at an incredible rate.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think AI will be
yeah.
building products for humans for sure. I think that humans will also be building products for humans with AI. I think
Yeah,
both
the
of those
motive
things
is
will
not
exist.
clear.
Yeah.
So another thing about product building, and you have like tons of feature requests when you are like kind of iterating in the early stage, like you're talking to a lot of customers, right? There are requests that suit only a type of customer. There are requests that are not really a problem for other customers, right? So how do you think about navigating through these requests and building the right ones?
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. It's a very challenging question because you kind of have to be crystal clear on who is the audience we care most about right now, right? Even if you're ultimately going to be like expanding into a lot of these other audiences, but you have to focus on someone. And for PLG, that's particularly challenging because you're kind of like forced to almost think about who are the folks who seem to be resonating with, that are like coming to us, because we can't just ignore those folks and go for some other category of people. That would be silly, right? And so I think that's been really interesting for us, is to try to figure out of the folks who are attracted to Kraftful, what is our core, what should be like the folks that we should serve the most. And I think we've gotten that right by doing some kind of complex analysis of like, who do we have, what's their problems, what do we know about their workday, what do we know about these other people's workday, where's the biggest need for exactly what we've built today versus the things we're building in the future that other folks may be more interested in. So I think it is like a lot of different factors that you have to take into account to be able to identify the right niche, specifically if you're doing a PLG motion, as opposed to if you're doing a sales-led motion. Then you can just sit in isolation and just have a much more kind of theoretical analysis of, here's the problem we solve, who are the best people for that, now let's go out and like do a bunch of cold outreach to just those kind of people. That's a different kind of challenge that we're not working with.
So, out of all these years of building Craftful, what do you think Craftful got right in the beginning that actually helped this growth stage right now?
I'd say that we definitely got the values right. We actually articulated our values like during one of the very first dinners, YC dinners. So, we drive from San Francisco down to YC every week for those dinners. And then on the way back, we would kind of like talk about the like whoever had given the talk during the dinner, and like kind of like think about that. And one of those talks, and I forget which talk that got us inspired to think about our values, but one of those talks like pushed us to think about our values, and we talked about it on the ride home, and then we started a doc when we got home, and then like wrote our values in the middle of the night. But those values are still Kraftful's values today, and there's a lot of things there that are like very specific to how we build products. We have one of our values is focusing on users, which has been true, and now we're building a product that focuses on users by helping everyone focus on users, right? So that's a very strong value. Another one is being pragmatic and never dogmatic. I think that that's really important, and that helps you pivot and iterate, and also never just kind of be stuck in a way. I hope that that's a value that will like govern Kraftful for the long term, because I think that like dogma is actually a really dangerous thing in companies, because someone comes up with with something, and then everyone then like starts misinterpreting it and implying it in strange ways, because they're just being dogmatic instead of just thinking about practically what is the problem, how do we best solve that problem, right? So I think, yeah, our values, I would say, have been really powerful. And one of our values is empathy is our superpower, which of course has sort of like really helped us build a better product.
Amazing. So, let's talk about tough moments. What was the number one toughest moment you had in your company? And can you narrate the story of what happened and how did you get through it?
I think there's been a lot of tough moments, because we started right before COVID, and then like market crash, chipset shortages, like all kinds of things, all kinds of macroeconomic things that had really big impact on our business at the time. And so there are a lot of like interesting moments that unfolded. I would say probably, when my co-founder told me that he didn't want to be a founder anymore, that was a really, really challenging moment. And in the timing of that was kind of challenging too, because that was right after I had raised a round, and it was I was already like incredibly exhausted from that experience, just having talked with lots and lots of investors. And I literally like that day, I was just like thinking about, this is a Friday, and I'm like, I so need this weekend to I am depleted to the point of like no return. I need this weekend. And we had a conversation, and he told me, and I was just like so shocked. Um, and and on top of that, we had some investors that were really supportive, but we also had a few investors who completely freaked out about it. Even though I like almost I don't think all of our investors have I've pitched them, so they hadn't. I don't think any of our investors had actually met my co-founder, but some investors who just like on their own for for no good reason reacted poorly to it. It was a very small amount, but it was not helpful at the time. And so I think that, yeah, I had the weekend to completely freak out, yeah, about it, and also kind of started reaching out to people to try to get help to figure out like, what do I do, how do I do this, what do I do next, what do I need to think about, like all those different things.
Was there any person that really helped you out throughout this situation?
Yeah, I reached out to one of the people I actually reached out to a handful of investors who I knew had gotten through similar things themselves. In fact, I talked with one of our investors, just incredibly helpful in saying, hey, look, I have a gazillion portfolio companies. The ones that have done the best are the ones where there was a co-founder departure. Like, just statistically, we've pulled the numbers on this, and the ones that have done well have done it when there's been a co-founder departure, and it's because like they needed to pivot like after, and like the co-founder, like, there was some like decision problems that were stopping that, and they ultimately were able to pivot. And I think that was actually true for us too in some ways. And I think that just hearing that at the time was really, really helpful.
Nice.
The thing I would have said that I learned from this experience is like thinking through my own experience. This all happened on a Friday. The thing I took away from that is that you really don't ever want to deliver bad news to people on a Friday, because then they can't really act on it, or like fully act on it, until Monday. So they can kind of just like go spinning, right, in various ways, and that's not great. So I've had this actually as a mantra, or like a thing I do. Like, if I am going to extend an offer to someone, and I know about that on a Friday, I extend the offer on Friday. I don't wait, like make them wait until Monday. If I have to fire someone, I absolutely do not fire them on a Friday, so that it's like on a day when they would be able to start taking action on it, and like reaching out to people, and do things. So I think that's like, if anything, like there was at least a learning in that whole experience. So sort of like, weekdays matter.
I asked this to all of the founders in my podcast, and this is quite an interesting and a vague one, but you can answer it at any at it's your wish. Like, how do you think about it? How do you define your life? Is your definition of life the work you do?
Hmm. I think my definition of life is the impact I have on people, and some of that impact comes through my work, and obviously, like being a founder with a product that serves thousands of users, that ends up being the most impactful thing. And previously, having been kind of worked on products that have had millions of users, or even more so with like Wikipedia, right? Like that ultimately, that's where I end up being most impactful. But I would say that impact is like small impact on a large number of people. I have much bigger impact on my kid, for example, right? That's just one person, but it's a really, really big impact, right? So I kind of think about my life in terms of the impact I'm having, and how can I kind of make sure that it's a good impact. It is the best possible impact I can have. I almost kind of design everything from like a user experience perspective. How can I optimize the experience in the best possible way? That's kind of how I think about it.
And one last follow-up question. I am so curious about this. Being a solo founder, you have to run a company, and you have a kid, you have a family with you. How do you handle burnout situations? Like, have you found a way through?
I haven't. I wish someone would tell me how to handle that. To be honest, because it's true. It's a great question, because when you're burnt out as a founder, if like if you're a founder, but you don't have to deal with a kid, then you can kind of like you can burn out, which almost all founders periodically burn out. Just the nature of that comes with the job. And then when you burn out, you can then focus on fixing your burnout. If you have a kid, they don't understand. It's like they should, no, nor should they understand. And you kind of have to cater to their needs despite being burnt out, but you can't figure out how to like unburn out. I think that like the one way in which it is helpful is that it gives it, there's some perspective on life, right? Like we recently did a really like big launch, and it was all consuming, and for like at some point I had to just like do an all-nighter, and then at the end of it, like on a Friday night, I still picked up my kid from school, and then I was like in mom mode, right? Like then I could not think about this launch that had been consuming my mind. So in some sense it helps, but when you're burnt out, you're burnt out. So it's sort of like it still is hard to move into mom mode when you're super burnt out. So I would say it's not a complete fix, but it helps a little bit.
So, if you're burnt out, you just take a day off. Like, what do you do?
That's what I should do. Yeah.
That you're not doing.
I don't do that. Yeah, no, I don't take a day off. I don't, I do try to figure out, like when I'm burnt out, I do try to figure out how do I fix this particular type of burnout, because there could be a lot of different types of burnout as a founder. There's a great post written by a YC ex partner, I think, on like founder burnout, that is like the different types of burnout that a founder can be through. Some of that has to do with you just worked a lot, and so that's you're burnt out as like you would be in any job. Sometimes your burnout is things are not working, and that like not working, lack of momentum, even though you're not working as much, but you're just like, I mean, you're always working a lot, but like it's not because you're just pulling all-nighters forever. It's just like things.
I think that was
working.
from Sam Altman. The second point was
Sam?
from Sam.
Yeah. And so there's like these different categories of burnout. So I guess I'm just like I try to like diagnose my problem, like which burnout category am I falling under right now, and then how do I then address this? And that can be different, right? Like that could be if I'm like creatively burnt out, then I may need to actually go and like see things and experience things so that I like that gets my creativity back. If I'm like haven't slept for a long time, maybe all I need to do is to just like sleep a lot, right? So like I think it is like trying to figure out what could possibly solve my problem. But yeah, I tend not to take the day off, which is like sometimes that would have been the answer, but it's hard to do as a founder. It's particularly hard to do as a solo founder.
That's right. So it has been quite fun to have this conversation with you. I think I learned a lot in this one. Thanks
Great.
for showing up, Yana. I'm so grateful for your time.
Yeah, thanks so
And
much
your
for having me.
stories.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, your story was awesome.
That's awesome.